Hello YouTube, Robin Hood Bricks here, and today we're focusing on Castle Hill. That is the hill in front of the castle that the drawbridge lands on and therefore allows our minifigures to get in and out over the drawbridge. Right, so the first thing we need is a base plate over here, and I've decided to make the hill about half the size of Castle Rock, the mountain that the castle itself is on. That's on 2 base plates, so I'm going to use 1 base plate over here. But most importantly, I'm going to leave a gap of 8 studs in between the 2 base plates to represent a stream underneath these 2 rail lines, and that the drawbridge is crossing. So it'll be bridging between 2 adjacent rocks with a deep stream river valley in between the 2. So here is a base plate, and I have pre-prepared it with my sleepers and train ballast system that I've used on all my railway tracks. And although we won't have the river valley done as part of this video, just have to imagine this gap will be fully sculptured with rocks and bits of blue brick and plate to represent the river itself. So the first step, I think, is to build the front and back sides, and I'm going to do exactly the mirror image of what I've done on Castle Rock itself, in that they're going to be 2 arches for the railway tracks here that are very unfinished, kind of out of rough rock on this side, and then on the far side, the side that you'll sort of see from further away, I'm going to have sort of more polished white decorative arches, just like we have on the far side of Castle Rock itself. So it'll kind of look like this is a steep valley that's never been looked after that well, because it's very sort of hard to get at, and this will be very much more man-made. Right, so I'm going to do that. So here is the unfinished side, and we've got a couple of bits of foliage to give the impression it's a bit more overgrown and a bit more rough rock shape. But essentially it is just the 2 arches. There's not much vertical surface for us to play with. So it's fairly plain, but that's fine, because we're really not going to see much of this, because it's going to be only 8 studs away from the one facing it, so not too much to worry about there. On the other side, we've got the decorated version, which is identical to the one, as I said, on the far side of Castle Rock itself. And this has got the 1x2 Technic bricks with the 1x1 stud pushed into it, just for a bit of decoration. And apart from that, it's just got the hints of rocks around the edges. And the reason I've done this like this is because what I want to do is basically make a sort of flat table type surface using a 16x16 and an 8x16, and then another 8x16, and to finish it off, an 8x8 plate. And that'll give me a nice sort of flat table in which to sort of work on for the next level, because I'm going to have some sort of rounded corners, much like Castle Rock has, but I'm also going to have this gradient coming down a bit from the edge where actually it's going to be this edge, the edge where the drawbridge is going to land, to start losing some of this gradient. Otherwise we're just going to end up as high as we started off. And the whole point of this hill is to provide a path up to the drawbridge, not just another flat plateau that's all at the same height. So in order to do this, I'm going to have to add a couple of supports. I've got 2 more of these white supports, 1, 2, which I'm going to use to just support this flat table layer. So let me do that. Oh, there we go. That was a bit harder than I thought, because I had to basically integrate this column, the bottom of this column that's got a little sort of foot sticking out, into the train ballast. So I had to pull off this track and sort all that out, but nonetheless we've got it there now. 2 pillars holding up this nice firm platform. We are going to support it on the front, and I'm aware that this one is very discoloured, but it doesn't matter, because that's going to be covered up with hill very soon, so it's a good use of it. Right, next stage is to probably fill in this front wall, and I'm thinking of doing something a bit different for this one. So for the side of this hill, this vertical surface, I want to do something different. I could do another sort of rocky hewn rock surface going all the way up, but we've done that on Castle Rock, so a bit of variety wouldn't go amiss. So I think I'm also not going to have buildings necessarily abutting this, being built right up against this rock. So I could use this as a blank canvas. And what I've decided to do is to actually do more of a sort of modern surface, in that it might have been painted over in the style of a mural. Maybe that's graffiti, maybe it's deliberate, maybe it's an art installation. I don't know. This image I created using 8-bit images from the internet, and I think it's a pretty good rendition of what it represents, and see how quick you can guess it. Can anyone guess what it is yet? You must be able to start seeing it now. Yes, it's Mario, one of my favourite characters. And I just mocked this up on a computer and I thought it looked absolutely fantastic, so I thought I'd better go ahead. I'm not sure if I'm wedded to it. I'll be interested to see what you think. But if I have some sort of small kiosk type buildings down here, like a souvenir stall or an information kiosk or something like that, then they sort of don't have a very firm back, not being sort of bricks and mortar, and therefore just having something behind them, so you might only see most of it rather than just all of it as we're seeing it now. But I think it might look quite good. But it's definitely interesting and a bit different. And another thing is, often in some major cities near railway lines, you get quite a lot of graffiti. So it might be that it's that as well. So anyway, tell me what you think. Okay, so the next stage is obviously raising up this edge so it meets and docks perfectly with the drawbridge end. And then we need some sort of decline in slope. Now, obviously, when that slope goes lower, we can't have it going over here because we're going to have trains charging around here. And I don't want a huge slope right in front of Mario because that would completely ruin that as well. So I think we're going to use the wall of the Lego room to have a path that sort of vanishes into the distance. So we don't have to have a great deal of real estate wasted in getting a slope that looks nice and goes from this height all the way down to this height. I mean, it's about 15-20 brick height. It's just going to take absolutely ages. So what I've got is a few 6x8 slate roof pieces, which I think actually look more like path pieces. And these are in old grey as well, so they actually sort of match the castle walls well. These are from a few sets back in the 80s and 90s, like 6552, Rocky River Retreat from 93. And I've got 3 of these from brick hauls in the past. And I thought they could be used to sort of bring this gradually down, sort of 1, and maybe a bit further 2, and then 3 round the corner. So it's just sort of, it's kind of like that. Maybe that's a bit more like there. And it'll be better than trying to do something all the way down here, because it have to zigzag and it look a right mess. So that's what I'm going to try and do next. Start rounding off all these edges and getting it so I can incorporate some of these. Now, after starting on the far side, I decided that that was probably a mistake, because I needed to have my reference point of where the drawbridge was going to land on this side first. So I've used a big ugly rock piece on one side of this lower area where the drawbridge is going to land, and I've used one of the corner big ugly rock pieces, or burps as they're called, to go on the corner. And it just makes the whole process a lot easier by taking large sections and making them look rough. And if you just put a few of these extra pieces on, then it really makes a good difference. So with the odd texture brick, just to show where perhaps repairs have been made in the past, and just some variations in slopes. And if I put on that top rung in old grey, then that is exactly the same height as the lip of the drawbridge, and it can land on there. So from that point, I can then start to use my slopes to come down from there and bring the path down and round towards the back wall. I shall keep going. Wow, that has been incredibly complex. Getting it so all these slopes can fit perfectly and sort of line up seamlessly and go around a corner has been a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. So I didn't do any more intermediate stops just because it was coming a bit too difficult and time consuming. So essentially you can see that there's lots of technique, lots of different random bricks just holding things together, and that's because I just need a lot of structure up there to get exactly the right heights, which means when I add these 3 pieces, we have one there coming from where the drawbridge will land, then one there, continuous slope, some old grey tiles there because I can't get the same effect sadly while I go around the corner, and then the third one there. Oh, so you can imagine how tricky that's been to get that exactly right. But now I've got this nice gradual slope, and seen from the angle we'll see in the room, it'll look like that with the wall being there, so people would approach the castle like that. And then there's this little lip here which will fit perfectly with the drawbridge. So the next thing I want to do is add a few details. You may have noticed I made a little cave up here, and I thought I could add a modified brick with studs on 2 sides to make a little roost for a bat to hang off. It's going to prove impossible to do on camera now, probably. No, there we are. So there he is. I doubt you'll ever really notice him when he's in the room, so it's probably a bit of wasted effort, but nonetheless, I like him and I know he's there. Second thing I wanted to do was on this sort of rocky outcrop, add a bit more nature, and you can get this nest, which is effectively not really a nest, it's actually a rough sort of bit from a minifigure around their neck, sort of the top of a fur-lined jacket or something like that, but used like this with an egg in it, it looks very much like a nest. And that idea was actually from set 75952, Newt's Case of Magical Creatures. But if I put that up there, then although that egg is rather large, it does look like a sort of lofty nest. And with that in mind, I thought I would put on a transclear piece with an eagle. Now that's obviously from the recent People Pack 60202 Outdoor Adventures, but I quite like that as well. So I want to put that somewhere, and this is probably about the most rural sort of lofty location I'm going to have, so I quite like that. So I don't know which way he'll be flying, but I like him. And then the last thing I want to add, you see I've got this green area over here, and that's just because it was going around this corner. Obviously there's a little bit of wasted space. Now I could have done a small building, but I didn't want to do that right in front of the castle, which might sort of detract from it and actually spoil our view of it. So I thought I'd put in a bit more nature, and I thought I'd put in a large tree. And while I was thinking about what this tree could signify, it made me think of another bit of the folklore around Robin Hood. And one of the very famous things in Sherwood Forest, there is a real Sherwood Forest, it's not far from where I live. And as part of the forest, it used to be a lot larger, is what's called the Major Oak. And the Major Oak is an incredibly old oak tree. And the legend goes that when Robin Hood was on his deathbed, he fired an arrow out of his window and it landed in a field, and that's where the Major Oak grew. And the real Major Oak is a genuine tree. They've dated it to about 800 to 1100 years old, so it's absolutely amazing. That's why it's got all these braces holding it up. And it's part of the Robin Hood and Nottingham folklore. Now, the thing is, it's probably not true, let's face it, because it's unlikely that that would be the one tree that would survive, but also because the window where Robin was supposed to have fired this arrow out of when he was very ill is about a mile away from where the tree is. So he must have had a pretty good shot on him, even when ill, in order to get that sort of range with a normal arrow. So it almost certainly isn't a true story. But it's a fun story and a nice one. So I've got a brick-built tree here, which I've just made out of arch pieces and plates and modified bricks and so on. I've made it a bit less deep on one side because that's the side going to be against the wall, and it won't take a full amount of foliage on that side. And then I'm going to have that as my Major Oak. And I think against the sort of white of the wall, I think that will really pop as a nice bit of colour and really add to the front of the castle, which will be here, rather than detract from it. And one last thing to check before we take all this up to the Lego room and install it in place is to make sure this drawbridge actually does fit well with the new castle hill. Look at that. Perfect. A seamless approach. Now the final touch for this castle will be to have some baddies attacking it, because the tourists want to see some sort of medieval fighting after all. So they can't fight amongst themselves. So what we need is the Evil Knight from Series 7 minifigures and the Frightening Knight from Series 15 minifigures to be attacking the castle. And then we can have some pretend sword fights and pretend, what is that? A morning star? A mace? No, it's a mace, isn't it? Fights. So these are really good minifigures with a boar and a bear as emblems, and dark green and black. Very nice. Now, another thing is that Mrs. Hood, my wife, also recently bought me 2 skeleton horses. Now, I'm not sure these are appropriate for what we want to do, having skeleton horses going up this hill, because they aren't particularly, realistic in a modern day city. However, maybe they are mechanical. I don't know. They have things like that at some theme parks. So I'm not sure if I'm certain I want to have two baddies appearing on skeletal horses. But the fact is, after Game of Thrones with their undead horses, my wife knew I really liked those, so she bought me two of those. We'll see. Well, as always, thank you very much for watching. Your view is appreciated. Do remember to like, comment and subscribe for more awesome LEGO videos. And next time on Robin Hood Bricks, we'll be putting both the mountain with castle and the hill that we've just done into the LEGO room, and maybe building up some buildings against Castle Rock itself. See you then!